The Santa suit had fused to his skin, and by the time hospital staff tried to cut it off, they realized the fabric wasn't just stuck. It was growing into him, carrying someone else's DNA buried deep in the threads. That was just one of 4 real Christmas cases. A man who came home from his office party to find photos of himself sleeping, taken from inside his locked apartment. A family in Vermont stalked all night by carolers in Victorian clothing who should have been dead for over a century. A mall Santa who started remembering murders he never committed after putting on a vintage costume. And a little girl whose Christmas list began coming true in ways that left people dead. These aren't campfire stories or creepypastas. There are police reports, recordings, and witness statements behind every one of them. Stay to the end, because Story 3 includes evidence that was actually shown in court. But first, let's start with Marcus. Story 1. The Surveillance Nightmare. Marcus Whitfield didn't scream at first. He just stood there in the blue glow of his kitchen light, holding a photograph that shouldn't exist because it showed him asleep in his own bed, taken from inside the room. Close enough to catch the faint crease in his pillow and the half-dried drool at the corner of his mouth. The photo slid from his fingers onto the tile, joining the others that had spilled out of the vintage music box he'd brought home from his office Christmas party. The one gift nobody admitted to giving him. The one that had started playing the same tinny lullaby at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night, like it was keeping an appointment. He'd tried to laugh it off the first time. Bad wiring, cheap gears, a prank that would get old. But what happened next changed everything. The next morning, the box wasn't on his dresser anymore. It was on the kitchen counter, lid open, song finished, as if someone had been standing there in the dark listening until the last note died. Marcus told himself he must have moved it in his sleep, except he never sleepwalked, and besides, his front door deadbolt was still locked, chain still on, and the only spare key was in his pocket. That night he didn't sleep. He waited with the lights off and his phone camera ready, staring at the music box like it might blink. At 3:16, the apartment felt colder, not because the heater quit, but because the silence tightened, as if the walls were holding their breath. When the hands on the microwave clock flipped to 3:17, the lid lifted on its own, slow and deliberate, and the lullaby started again, thin and cheerful in the darkness. Marcus rushed forward, grabbed the box, and snapped it shut, but the music kept going, muffled now, still perfectly on time. He yanked at the hinges until his fingers hurt, until the box gave with a dry crack and the bottom plate came loose. Something inside slid out onto the counter with a soft, papery slap. A stack of photographs bound with a rubber band, the top one so recent the ink looked fresh. He flipped through them, heart thudding harder with every image. Marcus eating takeout on his couch, Marcus brushing his teeth, Marcus stepping out of the shower with water still running down his chest. The angles were wrong, too low, too close, like whoever took them had been standing just beyond arm's reach. Marcus felt his stomach fold in on itself, and then he saw the dates in the corner, weeks, months, proof that someone had been inside his life for a long time. He called the police with shaking hands, and while the dispatcher tried to keep him calm, Marcus kept flipping because he couldn't stop. Because the human mind is cruel like that. It has to know how bad it gets. The last photo made his throat close. It wasn't from the past. It was from the future. It showed his living room on Christmas morning, the tree lit, presents piled beneath it, the exact angle from the hallway that led to his bedroom. And in the center of the frame, half swallowed by shadow, stood a tall figure facing the tree, head tilted like it was admiring the gifts. The timestamp read tomorrow. Marcus looked up from the picture, the air buzzing in his ears, and for the first time he noticed the faint scuff marks near the baseboard by the hallway closet, like something heavy had been dragged across the floor again and again. He walked toward it without meaning to, hand outstretched, and pressed his palm to the wall. It wasn't solid. It flexed slightly as if there was a hollow space behind it. Then came the sound, quiet, almost polite. A single knock from inside the wall, followed by a slow scrape like fingernails testing the edge of a door that didn't officially exist. Marcus backed away and the second knock came, closer somehow, followed by a whisper that slid through the drywall so faint he almost convinced himself he imagined it. Almost. But then the music box, still broken open on the counter, started playing again, even though the lid was off, even though the gears were exposed, even though nothing should have been able to wind it. And when Marcus realized the lullaby wasn't coming from the box at all, but from inside the wall, he understood why the photos were so close, because whoever had been watching him hadn't needed to break in. They'd already been home. Story 2. The Eternal Carolers. The first time Daniel Brennan saw the girl's face in the frost-glazed window, he thought it was a reflection, his own terrified eyes playing tricks on him, until the reflection smiled, slow and patient, and the smile didn't match anyone inside the room. Outside, the carolers kept singing as if they were nailed to the night itself, their voices rising and falling in perfect harmony while the blizzard erased everything beyond the farmhouse porch light. It was nearly midnight, the kind of dark that makes a house feel like the last warm thing on earth, and Daniel's family had turned it into a fort. Chairs against the doors, a dresser shoved across the front entry, everyone packed into the living room with blankets and trembling hands. They had been listening to those songs for hours, sweet melodies turned into a siege. Because every time the Brennans begged them to stop, the carolers only sang louder, and every few minutes they slipped in a new line that made the adults go silent. Names, full names, the kind you don't introduce to strangers. Daniel kept his old camcorder pointed at the window, not because he thought it would help, but because a part of him needed proof that he wasn't losing his mind. The girl outside, Victorian dress, hair in damp ribbons, lashes crusted with ice, lifted a pale hand and tapped the glass once, then twice, like she was asking to be let in. But what happened next changed everything. The moment her fingers left the pane, the tapping continued anyway. A steady knock echoing through the hallway as if the sound had moved inside the walls. To understand why that broke them, you have to go back to 8:47 p.m., when the singing first drifted up the driveway like something festive. Christmas Eve at the Brennan farmhouse was always loud. 14 relatives, stew on the stove, kids running under the tree. But the storm had started early, sealing the world off with wind and whiteout, and everyone was half drunk on the cozy lie that isolation feels safe when you're surrounded by family. When the first carol floated through the snow, people laughed. "Carolers," someone said, delighted, as if the night had delivered a postcard from another century. Daniel even joked about it while he grabbed the camcorder, wanting a wholesome clip for the family tape. They opened the curtain to look, and the laughter drained out of the room. The carolers weren't bundled teenagers from town. They wore old-fashioned coats and long skirts soaked through, their hems dragging in snow that should have been up to their knees. Their faces were too calm for the cold, their cheeks too pale, and when they sang, their mouths moved with careful precision like they were reciting something that mattered more than music. Still, the family waved through the glass and yelled, "Merry Christmas!" And the carolers answered by shifting the lyrics, sliding Daniel's mother's name into the chorus, then his uncle's, then one of the children's, each name pronounced perfectly, lovingly, as if they'd been practicing. Daniel tried to do the polite thing. He cracked the door, kept the chain on, and called out that the roads were dangerous, that they should go home. The singing didn't pause. It didn't even wobble. The nearest man, tall, hat-brim dripping, tilted his head and kept singing directly at Daniel, voice steady and wet, while the others turned slightly like a flock aligning to face its target. Daniel shut the door hard, laughed too loudly, told everyone it was a prank, and that's when the first real fear landed. The doorknob began to turn slowly, not jiggling like someone confused by a lock, but rotating with patient force, testing, learning. The family watched the knob move as if it were alive, heard the chain strain, and above it all the voices kept going, bright and holy, except the words had shifted again. The melody stayed the same, but the message underneath it turned wrong, threading itself through the house like smoke. "Let us in," they sang, soft as a lullaby. "Let us in," as if it were tradition. But what happened next changed everything. One of the children inside whispered, "Why are they standing so close to the door if they're singing to the whole house?" And everyone realized the footsteps outside weren't random. They were circling, slowly, evenly, around the farmhouse, song moving with them, always just outside whatever wall you leaned your ear against. By 11:20 p.m. the power began to flicker, and each time the lights dimmed, the voices felt closer, as if darkness was an open door. Daniel kept filming until his wrist ached, panning from window to window, catching glimpses of silhouettes drifting through the snow like ink in water. Sometimes there were 8 shapes, sometimes more. Sometimes the camera caught nothing at all, but the singing was still there, loud enough to vibrate the glass. The children started crying, the adults started praying, and the farmhouse, this old place that had held generations, began to feel like it had shrunk, like the walls were tightening to keep the outside from touching them. Then at exactly midnight, the carols stopped. Not fading, not trailing off. Stopped like someone cut the air in half. The sudden quiet was worse than the singing, because silence meant the carolers were no longer performing. Silence meant they were listening. Daniel lowered the camcorder, and in that quiet, a new sound rose from the front porch. Breathing. Slow, collective breathing, like a crowd gathered just inches from the door. Someone whispered Daniel's name, not sung this time, spoken right through the wood as if their mouth were pressed against it. Daniel stumbled back, and the girl appeared again at the living room window, her face filling the frost. Her eyes didn't blink. Her lips moved without sound, forming 3 words Daniel understood anyway. "We're still cold." Morning came gray and brutal. The storm eased enough for them to open the door, and the porch was empty. No footprints, no wet hems, no signs of anyone ever standing there, only a thin crust of ice over the welcome mat, like the house had exhaled and frozen its own breath. Daniel rewound the tape with shaking hands, needing to prove it had happened. And at first it looked normal. Shadows, snow, the distant shapes, the singing. Then he turned the volume up. Beneath the carol, beneath the melody he'd heard all night, there was another layer, low and crowded, as if a second group had been packed right up against the microphone. Dozens of faint voices, too many to count, murmuring along out of sync, and every so often between verses. A clear, wet sound like someone licking their lips. Daniel stopped the tape and stared at the camcorder, because the microphone had been inside the house the entire time. And yet the clearest whisper on the recording, clear enough to make the hair rise on his arms, came from right behind him, close to the lens, as if someone had been standing in the living room with them, singing under their breath, waiting for the moment the door finally opened. Story 3. The Santa Suit. Derek Paulson was already bleeding when the security cameras caught him, crawling on his hands and knees through a fake chimney display after closing time, red smears on the white snow, and a Santa hat slipping sideways on his head like it didn't belong there. He was laughing, but it wasn't joy. It was the kind of sound people make when their mind has nowhere left to run. 2 guards rushed in, shouting his name, and Derek snapped his head toward them with eyes wide and glassy, tugging at the beard with both hands. It didn't budge. The hair wasn't just glued. Parts of it had sunk into his skin, and when he pulled harder, his cheeks pulled with it, stretching like the suit was stitched to his face. "They're still down there," he whispered, voice cracking, and then he said a name neither guard recognized, a child's name like he was reading it off a headstone. But what happened next changed everything. When they grabbed his arms to stop him from tearing his own face open, Derek screamed, I remember where I put them. And he sounded like someone else was speaking through him. 2 weeks earlier, it had been a simple job. Seasonal backup Santa at a busy suburban mall. Easy money, sit in a chair, smile for photos, listen to kids ask for tablets and puppies. The manager handed Derek the costume from a locked storage room and called it vintage, like that should make it special. The suit looked normal at first. Heavy red fabric, thick white trim, a beard packed in a plastic sleeve. But the moment Derek lifted it, a sour, trapped smell rose up. Something older than dust, like insulation and sweat sealed in heat for decades. He hesitated, and the manager laughed and said the last guy had sensitive skin, like that explained why he quit without notice. Derek stepped into the pants, pulled the jacket on, and felt the weight settle over his shoulders in a way that was almost comforting, like being wrapped up tight against winter. Then he reached behind his neck for the zipper and realized he couldn't find the end of it. Not because he was clumsy, because the zipper tab wasn't there. The suit had no opening, just a seam that looked like it had never been meant to come apart. He told himself it was tucked inside, that he'd figure it out after the shift because kids were already lining up and the photographer was waving him over. The first shift went fine, almost too fine. Derek's voice came out deeper when he spoke as Santa, rich and warm, and the kids stared up at him like he was real. But little things started happening that made his stomach tighten. A boy sat down and Derek heard himself say, "How's your mom doing after the hospital?" Even though the boy hadn't said a word, the kid flinched, eyes filling, and his father snapped his head around like Derek had just committed a crime. Derek tried to laugh it off, tried to turn it into a gentle Santa moment, but the words kept arriving in his mouth before he chose them. Private details, secrets, confessions, names, addresses, arguments. Things children shouldn't be carrying, yet somehow Santa already knew. When he finally went to the changing room to take the suit off, he tugged at the collar and felt pain, sharp, immediate. He looked down and saw the white trim had left angry red marks around his neck like a rope burn, except the fibers were stuck. He pinched the fabric and tried to peel it away, and his skin lifted with it. He stopped, breathing fast, telling himself it was sweat and friction, telling himself he'd shower and it would loosen. But what happened next changed everything. When he yanked the beard off, it didn't come free. Several strands stayed behind, threaded through tiny pinprick holes in his cheeks as if they'd rooted there, and when he stared closer in the mirror, he could swear the holes were widening. By the fourth day, Derek stopped going home in the costume. He tried once, walking out to the parking lot wrapped in a coat, but the heat under the suit was unbearable, like a fever trapped beneath layers, and the smell followed him. Stronger now, sour, sweet, and metallic. At night, he'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling and he'd hear bells, soft at first, then clearer, like a sleigh passing through vents and walls. He would sit up, listen, and the bells would stop the moment he moved, as if whatever was making the sound knew he'd become aware. He started dreaming of places he'd never been, a narrow service corridor behind the food court, a maintenance hatch in the floor, a crawl space thick with old wiring. In the dreams, he wasn't Derek. He was bigger, older. He was wearing the suit and it fit like skin. And there were kids, always kids, standing in a line, hands clasped, faces tilted up, trusting. Derek would wake with his mouth tasting like pennies, the word good stuck in his throat like a lie. He told the manager he was done. The manager smiled too quickly and said, "Just one more shift, Christmas Eve, biggest night." Derek tried to walk away, but his feet carried him back the next day like something had tied a string around his ribs. Christmas Eve was chaos. Lights, crowds, screaming kids, parents with phones up. And Derek sat down in the Santa chair feeling like he was watching his own hands move from far away. Then a little girl climbed onto his lap and leaned close, voice small. "Do you remember me?" she asked. Derek's heart stuttered. She was a stranger. But the suit tightened around his chest as if it didn't want him to breathe, and a memory slid into his head like a knife. A different Christmas, decades ago, the same mall before it was remodeled, a hidden door behind a fake fireplace. Derek blinked, dizzy. The girl smiled sadly, as if she'd been waiting a long time to ask. "You promised," she whispered. Derek tried to stand up, to rip the suit open, to run, but the costume held him, like a restraining hand. He heard himself whisper back, "I know where you are." And the moment the words left his mouth, his own mind recoiled in horror, because he suddenly did. But what happened next changed everything. The bells started ringing again, loud this time, right above him, and Derek turned his head to look up at a vent near the ceiling and felt, truly felt, something move inside the ductwork, as if it had been waiting for him to notice. That's when he bolted. He shoved past the photographer, past a line of children, ignoring the screams, ignoring the security guards chasing him through the corridor. The suit made him stronger in a wrong way, pain distant, fear muffled, like it was steering him with blunt hands. He ducked behind a decorative display, clawed his way into the fake chimney, and wedged himself inside, scraping skin off his knuckles, dragging the red fabric through black dust. The cameras caught it all. Derek disappearing into the display like an animal returning to a burrow, pulling himself through a space no adult should fit. When they finally cornered him near the maintenance corridor, he was shaking, beard soaked with sweat, eyes rolling as if he was watching something behind his eyelids. "They're still down there," he said again, softer now, almost reverent. "I can hear them singing." A guard grabbed the beard to yank him away from the wall, and the guard recoiled when the beard didn't pull free, when Derek's skin stretched with it, thin and wet like it had fused. Derek began to sob. But even as he cried, a smile tried to crawl onto his face, fighting him. "I was a good Santa," he whispered in a voice that wasn't his. "I kept them quiet." And as the guards dragged him away, the camera picked up one last detail that made the footage impossible to forget. The suit, right at Derek's shoulder, moved on its own, just a small tightening, like a hand gripping him from the inside, refusing to let go. Story 4. The Christmas List. Amy Chen realized something was wrong at 3:12 a.m., not because her daughter was crying or because a window was open, but because the baby monitor on her nightstand showed Sophie sitting at her small desk, writing on a sheet of paper with slow, careful strokes. Amy stared, half asleep, trying to make sense of it. Sophie was only 7, and they'd put her to bed hours ago. Then Amy turned her head toward the bedroom doorway and saw Sophie's room across the hall. Dark, still, the nightlight glowing faintly under the door like a steady heartbeat. She got up, walked over, and pushed the door open. Sophie was in bed, sleeping on her side with her stuffed reindeer tucked under her chin. Amy looked back at the monitor. The Sophie at the desk paused mid-sentence, then began turning toward the camera. Too slowly, as if savoring the movement. And the strangest part wasn't the turning. It was the shadow on the wall behind her. It didn't move at all. But what happened next changed everything, because the figure on the screen, still half-turned, lifted its head and looked directly into the camera with a calmness no child should have. And Amy heard the faint scratch of pen on paper coming from inside the walls, like the house itself was writing. 2 days earlier, the first list had seemed like nothing more than an odd little surprise. Amy had been cleaning up wrapping paper from Sophie's school holiday project when she found an envelope addressed to Santa, tucked behind the couch cushion as if it had been hidden in a hurry. The handwriting wasn't Sophie's, too neat, too adult, the letters perfectly spaced, and the paper smelled faintly of attic dust. Amy opened it expecting a normal wish list, toys, candy, a puppy. Instead, she found 12 requests written like commands, each line precise and unsettling in ways that made her smile fade. The first few were almost normal. A new bike, a white kitten, but then the list turned. Make Mommy's boss stop being mean. Make Daddy stop talking to that woman. Make Mr. Halverson go away. Amy stared at those names, confused, and called Sophie over. Sophie looked at the letter, frowned like she'd never seen it before, and swore she didn't write it. Amy wanted to believe her. Still, she did what parents do when the world feels slightly off. She rationalized. Maybe Sophie copied it from a movie. Maybe an older kid wrote it as a prank. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence that it was hidden in their living room like it belonged to the house. The first wish came true the next morning. Sophie's teacher called to say a classmate's family was giving away a white kitten, exactly like the list said, because of allergies. Amy laughed, relieved, and told herself the whole thing had been nothing. But what happened next changed everything. That afternoon, Amy's phone rang again, and her boss's assistant was sobbing so hard Amy could barely understand her. Her boss had collapsed during a meeting, face first into a conference table, rushed out by paramedics. Amy arrived at work to find the office silent, people whispering, the promotion she'd been chasing suddenly opening up as if the universe had cleared the path with a casual swipe. Amy drove home with her hands shaking on the steering wheel, the kitten asleep in a carrier on the passenger seat, and she couldn't stop thinking about the line on the list. Make Mommy's boss stop being mean, because technically he wasn't being anything anymore. That night she found Sophie at the kitchen table humming to herself while she drew a Christmas tree. Amy asked gently if Sophie remembered writing the list. Sophie blinked, confused, and said, "What list?" Then she tilted her head and added in a voice so flat it didn't sound like a child's, "Santa listens better when you don't ask nicely." After that, every wish arrived like a gift wrapped in someone else's skin. Amy's husband, Kevin, got a call that his co-worker, an upbeat woman named Talia who always sent Merry Christmas emails, had gone missing after leaving the office. 2 days later, Talia's car was found abandoned near a riverbank, driver door open, keys still in the ignition. Kevin tried to comfort Amy, but his own face had gone pale because the list had mentioned her. Make Daddy stop talking to that woman. And the words sat between them like a knife neither wanted to touch. Amy began sleeping with the list folded under her pillow like it was a talisman, and each night she woke to the same sensation. The house listening, pipes clicking, floorboards settling. A faint rhythmic scratch that came and went like breathing. When she checked Sophie's room, Sophie would be asleep, always asleep. Yet in the morning, new lines appeared on the paper, ink darker than the rest, as if freshly written. Amy tried to throw the list away. It showed up again, perfectly centered on the kitchen counter, smoothed flat like a place setting. She tried to burn it. The flame wouldn't catch, the paper curling slightly before relaxing back into pristine shape, cool to the touch. Kevin started locking their bedroom door at night, and even that felt useless because the writing didn't need doors. It was coming from inside the house. The monitor night was when Amy broke, seeing her daughter asleep in bed while another "her" wrote on the screen snapped something primal into place, an understanding that their problem wasn't a prank or a coincidence, or even a haunting in the familiar way people like to imagine. It was possession by paperwork. A contract written in a child's name. Amy stood in the hallway staring at Sophie's sleeping face and forced herself to do the one thing she'd avoided since the first wish came true. She went to the attic. The attic hatch was in the hallway ceiling, the pull cord stiff with old paint. When she climbed up, the air turned cold and stale, smelling of cardboard and insulation. She swept a flashlight beam across stacked boxes left by previous owners and noticed a narrow space behind them where the plywood wall had been scuffed, like someone had been dragging something in and out for years. Amy moved the boxes, hands trembling, and found a tin Christmas cookie box wedged into the gap. Inside were papers, dozens of them, folded into squares yellowed at the edges, each one a letter to Santa. Some were childish, some were neat and adult like hers. All of them were lists, names, demands, wishes that didn't sound like wishes at all. And on the oldest one, dated in a shaky hand years before Sophie was born, Amy read a line that made her throat close. "Don't let me leave. I want to stay here forever." Amy didn't remember climbing down from the attic. She only remembered sitting on the hallway floor, papers spread around her like fallen leaves, while Sophie stood at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, watching silently. Sophie didn't look sleepy, she looked patient. Amy asked, barely able to speak, "Who wrote these?" Sophie smiled a small, secret smile and said, "Girls who wanted things." Then Sophie stepped closer, and the hallway light flickered in a way that felt like a wink. Amy looked down at the newest list, Sophie's list, the ink still dark, and saw a line that hadn't been there before. It was written neatly, confidently, like the hand had practiced it for years. Make Sophie stay forever, too. But what happened next changed everything, because Sophie leaned in close enough that Amy could smell paper and dust on her breath, and she whispered, "Santa doesn't come down the chimney in this house. He comes up." Christmas morning, Amy didn't open presents. She didn't make coffee. She didn't even wake Kevin gently. She shook him hard, shoved clothes into bags, grabbed Sophie's coat and hauled her out the front door while the tree lights blinked behind them in the living room like a warning beacon. Sophie didn't fight. She didn't cry. She only looked back at the house as if she was saying goodbye to something she'd known longer than her own parents. In the driveway, Amy turned to lock the door out of habit and froze. On the inside of the front window, pressed against the glass from within, was a fresh sheet of paper held in place by an unseen hand. A new list, a new set of names. At the top, in the same neat handwriting, were 4 words that felt less like a wish and more like a promise. "I can still write.